Apparently, Ray Dalio thinks we can have 70 trillion of government debt and we'll still be okay. How do I say that? Because I'm reading this from, you okay, boys? From Goldman Sachs. U.S. fiscal worries. Is this time different? And it just made me think about this book I got from Ken Rogoff and Carmen Reinhardt. This time it is different. It is different. 8 centuries of financial folly. They took it on the chin for a lot of stuff in there. I can't remember off the top of my head why they were taken to task. I can't remember. But it hasn't been retracted. I just think they had to come back and say, okay. Anyway, it's just funny because this right here, Goldman Sachs talks to Dalio. No, Paco. They talked to Dalio, Rogoff, which had written this book right here, and then they talked to Neil Ferguson, Sir Neil Ferguson, who had actually a foreword in this book right here. This is from 2009, and I just I chuckle because all these guys are smarter than everybody. They're kind of like the Douglas Murrays. They're so smart. Everyone should listen to them, and if you don't listen to them, you're the idiot. Dude, can we just stop listening to these people? These guys don't know what to talk about, man, any more than you and I. And here's, look at Sir Niall Ferguson. Look at him. Ooh, look at so smart. Dude, anyway, it's just I want to point something out here. With interest rates were at record highs even before the recent rise, or interest expenses were at record highs even before the recent rise in rates. So here we are, and this is the interest expense as a percentage of GDP. This goes back to 1989. We're paying over 3% of GDP in interest right there alone, 3%. Here we are up here, the highest we've ever been, but we've been well above 3% for a long, long time. Even though, whoa, the interest rates are going down as a percent we're paying relative to GDP was going up. That's impossible. Look at this. The amount we were paying on interest was going sky high up, and yet the rates themselves were going down. That's impossible. That's impossible. And yet it's what's happening. People say, yeah, but this is a 10-year treasury, by the way. People say, yeah, but the 10-year treasury in 1982 was 15 and a quarter. Yeah, and then in 1992 is not 15 and a quarter. It was down here, about 6. And then in 2002, it was down here, about 4. And yet we're still paying massive high interest rates. Why? Because we issue so much debt. Not interest rates, massive high interest expense because we issue so much debt. On top of that, by the way, massive growth from 82 to 99 right there. All the while, the interest rates are dropping and the expense on interest was through the roof. The highest it's ever been. So someone sit here right now in 1992 and say, oh my goodness, it's probably 90. Oh, let's see. We go right there, 82. Let's say 84. Someone sit there in 84 and say the interest expense is the highest it's ever been. Well, no way. And yet the markets, the economy just took off like a bat out of hell from 82 to 1999. Look at that. Interesting. And yet on top of that was our debt going higher. You know what else was going lower? Was the interest rates themselves. So the debt was going higher, the interest on debt was going higher that we're paying, and the debt and then the interest rates themselves are going low. Kind of crazy. But how about these years when we have very little interest on public debt down here? Were these great economies? No, the 80s was riddled with massive depressions. The 1800s, riddled with massive depressions. Massive. And you can see right here, gross public debt right here. I mean, this is in the blue, gross public debt for the 1800s, way down here. And yet the market, the economy wasn't doing great in the 1800s. It just wasn't. I'm sorry. There were some years it was, but massive depressions. I'm telling you, man, crazy. Anyway, I just find it funny. So let's see what old Dalio says right here. How worried should we be about a heart attack U.S. debt crisis? Well, this reminds me of a guy who goes with a lot of plaque in their arteries, who eats a lot of fatty food and doesn't exercise, saying to the doctor, you warned me that bad things would happen to me if I didn't change my ways, but nothing has happened to me yet, so why should I? Okay, well, that's just idiotic there, Ray Dalio. Oh, my goodness. First of all, do fatty foods, i.e. red meat, cause you to have a heart attack? No, but let's not even go down that road for just a second. You warned me for years that if we could do a million things like this. If it didn't happen, I shouldn't have changed my ways. Oh, my goodness. All right. So let's go here. What could be the catalyst for a U.S. heart attack and debt crisis? All right, the catalyst would be the convergence of the 3 influences I mentioned, which may be hastened or postponed by policy. For example, if the budget deficit is lowered to 3% of GDP, from what I and most others projected to be about, that would go a long way to reducing the risk. So I went up to Claude and I said, Claude, let's take a look at what the budget deficit being 3% of GDP would be in 10 years. So I said, how much would the U.S. debt be in 10 years if we ran a budget deficit of 3% of GDP each year for the next 10? And then Claude says, look, we're going to give us we're going to write here, we're going to give us a GDP that's growing. I thought I said 4% someplace. Hold on a sec. Current debt, 36.5 trillion. Current GDP is 29 trillion. Annual nominal GDP growth, nominal is including inflation, is 4%. Annual deficit, 3% of GDP each year. Starting in 2025, all right, and then we go all the way down until 2035. Projected total U.S. debt would be 47 to 48 trillion dollars. But the debt to GDP ratio would drop from 126 as it is currently to 110. That will certainly resolve the debt cycle. Oh, our debt to GDP is down. That's great. But the debt itself is up from 36 trillion to 48 trillion. Oh, and I said, what about 20 years? Then we're talking a debt burden would be $70 trillion. But again, the debt to GDP would be down to 108% as opposed to 126 is now. I mean, these guys want their cake and they can eat it too. They say, well, it's a debt to GDP, 100% is bad, but if we can get the GDP, the deficit just adds to the debt. If you have a 3% deficit on GDP, you're still adding to your debt. If the debt is the issue that you're concerned with, the whole thing, you should not sit there and say, we need to reduce our deficit from 7 to 3% of GDP. We need to reduce it to surplus. There should be no deficit if our debt is the issue. We should be talking about paying off debt. Immediately, if you say right here, the budget deficit should be lowered to 3% of GDP, then you cannot turn around and say, I'm worried about the debt. You can't do that because you're adding to the debt. You're just maybe adding it at a slower pace than we are now, but you're still adding to it. And if the issue is the debt in of itself to start with is a big freaking bugaboo, then that's unacceptable. And here he goes again. The government can and should reduce the budget deficit to 3% of GDP. All right, that balances spending cuts and tax revenue increases, so as not to inflict fiscal trauma on any part of the economy. I estimate this would lead to interest rates decline to about 1.5%. But look at this. Look at this. What were right here? What were interest rates doing, Dalio? Well, the percentage of interest payment relative to GDP was going through the roof. Interest rates were dropping like a freaking brick in water. How can you turn around and sit there and say, if we continue to pay our debt service, we're going to have higher interest rates? When it's just not factually, the evidence isn't there to show that. At least in the United States. How can you sit there and say that? Crazy to me. And these are the guys that all Wall Street, because Rogoff's got Harvard pedigree, Neil Ferguson's sir has been freaking banded a sir like Sir Paul McCartney and Richard Branson. And then what's the other guy? Then Dalio. Dalio's got money. So Dalio's got money, Rogoff's got Harvard, and Niall Ferguson has got a sir. Oh. Anyway, so if debt is the issue, then there should be no deficit at all, Ray Dalio. God bless. Love your thoughts. It just boggles the mind, man. How just these guys just, I guess it's just if you got money or you got pedigree, people just listen to you because I don't know why. But look, here I am shaved, haven't showered yet, and I haven't shaved in my freaking shirt, my Jill orange shirt. What do I know? I don't know nothing. I just know these guys don't know nothing either. God bless.